All right, welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be looking at continuous glucose monitoring, or as most people know it, CGM.
Mm.
Um, you know, maybe you're here because you're interested in it for yourself, maybe for a family member, or maybe you just like to keep up on the latest in health tech. But whatever brought you here today, we're going to be going beyond just the basics. We're going to look at why CGM is such a big deal and how it's changing diabetes care.
Absolutely. It is fascinating to think about how far we've come from just those finger prick tests, which really only give you a snapshot of your blood sugar at one point in time, to this continuous monitoring that reveals so much more.
Yeah, and that's what I think is so interesting about it. It's like getting a look behind the scenes
Yeah.
at how our bodies are reacting in real time. But before we go any further, can you give us a little like CGM 101? How do these things actually work?
Sure, so picture this. You've got this tiny little sensor, it's about the size of a nickel, and it's inserted just under your skin. This sensor is constantly measuring your glucose levels, and then sending that information wirelessly to a receiver. Now, this receiver could be your smartphone or a dedicated device. It really is pretty amazing how seamlessly it all works.
I can see why people are so excited about this. I know so many people who just hate doing those finger pricks all the time. This just seems so much easier and more comfortable.
It is. It definitely is more convenient and comfortable. But the real magic of CGM is the insights it gives you. You see, with traditional finger pricking, you might miss what's happening between those tests. But CGMs, they capture all of those ups and downs, so you get a much more complete picture of your glucose levels throughout the day.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's not just about knowing your blood sugar right now, but how it changes after you eat or when you exercise,
Ah.
even when you're stressed. Having all that information must be really helpful when you're trying to manage your diabetes.
It is. And this leads us to an important concept in diabetes management, time in range, or TIR. This refers to how much time your glucose levels stay within a healthy range. CGMs help you see your TIR and track what affects it.
So, like if you see your TIRs low, you can start to figure out what might be causing those fluctuations, like maybe certain foods or activities, and then you can make changes.
Exactly. CGMs empower you to become your own health detective. For example, you might discover that your blood sugar spikes every time you eat a certain type of food. We call these post-meal spikes. Armed with this knowledge, you can start making more informed choices about your diet, maybe by adjusting portion sizes or swapping out certain ingredients.
It's amazing how this data can lead to real changes. It's like going from just reacting to your blood sugar to actually being proactive.
Absolutely. And it's not just about managing highs. CGMs can actually prevent dangerous lows, especially when you're sleeping. These devices can alert you if your glucose drops too low so you can take action and avoid a potentially serious situation.
That must be a huge relief, not just for the person with diabetes, but for their families too. So we've talked about all this information you get from CGMs, but it seems like it could be a lot to take in. Where do you even start with all that data?
That's a great question. There are actually different types of CGMs available, each with its own way of presenting and interpreting data. The two main categories are real-time CGM, or RT-CGM, and flash glucose monitoring, also known as FGM.
Okay, so what's the main difference between those two?
Real-time CGMs, like the Dexcom G7, are constantly updating your glucose levels so you can see your current reading, plus trends and patterns, right on your phone or receiver. It's like having a live feed of your blood sugar.
That sounds really helpful for staying on top of things and catching any changes as they happen. What about flash glucose monitoring? Does that work differently?
Flash glucose monitoring, or FGM, is a bit different. It requires you to scan the sensor with a reader or your smartphone to get a glucose reading. So it's not a constant stream of data like RT-CGM, but more like on-demand readings when you want to check your levels. A popular example of FGM is the Freestyle Libre system.
So it's kind of like choosing between a GPS that's always guiding you or a map that you check when you need directions.
That's a great analogy. Both have their pros and cons, depending on your needs and preferences. Host? And just like with a GPS or a map, the best type of CGM for you really depends on your lifestyle, how closely you need to monitor your glucose, and even just personal preference.
And I imagine cost is a factor too, right?
Yeah,
These systems sound pretty advanced, so I'm guessing they're not exactly cheap.
you're right. Cost is definitely something to think about. CGMs can range from a few $100s to several $100s per month, especially if you're paying out of pocket. But the good news is more and more insurance plans are covering them, especially for people with type 1 diabetes and those with type 2 who are on insulin.
That's good to hear. It seems like the healthcare industry is starting to recognize how valuable this technology is and making it more accessible. It'd be amazing if someday CGMs were as common as, like, fitness trackers.
I agree. We're definitely moving in that direction. But like any technology, CGMs do have their limitations. Accuracy is one that comes up a lot. While these devices are incredibly sophisticated, there's still a chance for a little bit of error, usually around 10 to 15%.
So it's still a good idea to double-check with a finger prick test every now and then, especially if a reading seems off, or you're having symptoms that don't match the CGM data.
Exactly. It's about using CGMs as one tool in your diabetes management toolkit, not relying on them completely. And of course, there are other things to keep in mind, like skin irritation from the adhesive, or having to calibrate some systems with finger prick tests.
All right, it's helpful to remember that it sounds like CGMs are a great innovation, but they're not perfect. It's still important to be involved in managing your own health. But even with those limitations, the benefits seem huge. It must be so empowering for people with diabetes to have this kind of insight into their bodies.
It is. It absolutely is. One of the most exciting things about CGM technology is how it shows people the impact of their lifestyle choices on their blood sugar in real time. And that can be really motivating and lead to positive changes.
Can you give us some examples of how that works in real life?
Sure. Imagine being able to see exactly how different foods affect your glucose levels. With a CGM, you can try out different portion sizes, different types of carbohydrates, even the timing of your meals to find what works best for you.
Wow. It's like having a personalized nutrition coach.
Yeah.
Right there on your wrist. I bet that's especially helpful for people who have trouble with those post-meal spikes.
It is. It really is. And it's not just diet. You can also see how exercise affects your glucose, for example. You might find that high-intensity workouts cause your blood sugar to drop quickly, while something like yoga has a more gradual effect.
That's fascinating. So you could adjust your insulin?
Or have a snack ready, depending on what kind of exercise you're doing.
Exactly. And even things like stress and sleep can be monitored. You might realize that your blood sugar tends to go up when you're stressed, or that you have more lows after a bad night's sleep.
Yeah.
And with that knowledge, you can develop strategies to manage those situations.
It really does seem like CGMs are shifting things from reactive to proactive management. Instead of just reacting to symptoms, you can actually anticipate changes and make adjustments before they become problems. It's like having a crystal ball for your blood sugar.
That's a great way to put it.
And the future of CGM technology is even more exciting. We're seeing some incredible advancements that could completely revolutionize diabetes care.
Okay, now I'm really curious. What's coming next?
Well, one of the most highly anticipated developments is non-invasive CGM. Imagine being able to monitor your glucose constantly without needing a sensor under your skin. Researchers are looking into different technologies, from wearable patches to even contact lenses that could measure glucose levels through your tears.
Wait, contact lenses. That sounds like something out of science fiction.
It does, doesn't it? But it's becoming a reality. And it's not just about convenience. Non-invasive CGM could make glucose monitoring possible for so many more people, including people who don't like needles, or those who just want a more discreet way to manage their health.
Wow, that would be incredible. It could change how we think about preventative health care. Maybe people could track their glucose levels even before they develop diabetes.
Exactly. Early detection and intervention could really make a difference for long-term health. And that's just the beginning. We're also seeing progress with closed-loop systems, which are often called the artificial pancreas.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that. Isn't that where the CGM connects to an insulin pump and automatically adjusts the insulin based on your readings?
That's right. It basically takes the guesswork out of insulin dosing. And with advances in artificial intelligence and data analytics, these systems are becoming even more intelligent.
So they're not just reacting to your current glucose levels,
Yeah.
but actually predicting future trends and adjusting the insulin accordingly.
Exactly. Imagine getting personalized recommendations on your phone, like based on your glucose trend and your upcoming meal. We recommend reducing your next insulin dose by 10%.
That's amazing. It's like having a virtual diabetes coach with you 24/7. It seems like we're moving towards a future where technology is truly personalized and proactive, and diabetes management is so much easier.
I agree. And while these advances are still in development, they give us a glimpse into a future where diabetes care is completely transformed, not just for people living with diabetes now, but for generations to come.
It's really inspiring to see how far we've come and the potential for the future. But with all this talk about the future, it's important to remember that CGMs are already making a difference. They're available right now to help people live healthier lives.
Absolutely. Choosing the right CGM And learning to use it effectively can be a game changer for anyone with diabetes.
And speaking of how to use them effectively, we talked a lot about the what and the why of CGMs, but I'm curious about the how. What are some practical tips and strategies for using these devices in everyday life? So let's get practical. You've picked out your CGM, you're ready to go, but then you've got all this data staring back at you. It can be a bit overwhelming, so where do you even start?
That's true. It can definitely feel like you're learning a whole new language, but once you get the hang of the basics, it becomes much easier.
So what are some of the first things people should know when they start using a CGM?
Well, one of the most important is sensor placement. You want to make sure that sensor is nice and snug, right where it's supposed to be. For the Freestyle Libre, that's usually on the back of your upper arm. Dexcom G7 gives you a few more options. Upper arm, abdomen, even the upper buttocks for kids. And the Medtronic Guardian is typically worn on the abdomen.
So finding that sweet spot for comfort and good readings is important. It's like Goldilocks. Not too tight, not too loose, but just right.
Exactly. And once that sensor's in place, you got to make sure it stays put. We've all heard those stories about sensors falling off at the worst possible moment.
Oh, yeah. I can only imagine. How do you avoid that?
Preparation is key. Before you put that sensor on, clean your skin really well. Use the alcohol wipes they give you. And here's a pro tip. Using a skin barrier wipe, something like Skin Tack, can really help it stick better and prevent it from peeling off too soon.
Like giving it some extra sticking power.
Exactly. And if you're worried about it coming loose, especially if you're active or live somewhere humid, you can always use an overpatch. There are some great brands out there, like Griff Grips or Rocket X. They add an extra layer of security.
Overpatches. That's a good tip. So let's say our sensor's good to go. We're getting all this data, graphs, numbers. How do we actually make sense of it all?
Well, that's where understanding trends comes in. It's important to remember, those CGM readings are a little delayed, about 10 to 15 minutes behind your actual blood sugar. So don't focus too much on any one reading. Look for patterns over time.
So if I see a spike after a meal, it's not necessarily a reason to freak out. It's more about seeing if it happens a lot and if it's something I need to address.
Exactly. You might see that your blood sugar consistently goes above your target after certain foods, even if you're within your carb limit.
So it's not just about counting carbs, but how those carbs affect you specifically.
Right. And if you see those post-meal spikes happening a lot, you could try different kinds of carbs, adjust your portions, or even talk to your doctor about your meds.
It's like you're a detective for your own body. That must feel pretty empowering.
It is. And the same goes for exercise. You might see that your blood sugar drops faster during high-intensity workouts, or that you need a snack afterwards to avoid a low.
So you can adjust your routine based on that.
Yeah, exactly. And CGMs can also show you how things like stress, sleep, even some medications affect your glucose.
It's amazing how much you can learn about your body with this technology. But speaking of all those changes, those CGM alerts can be a bit much sometimes, right? It's like having this little alarm going off in your pocket all the time.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's called alarm fatigue. But the good news is you can customize those alerts, so you don't have to hear them for every little thing.
So it's about finding a balance between staying informed and not being bombarded with alerts all day.
Exactly. You can set your low alerts a little higher, maybe around 75 to 80 milli-GDL, to catch those dips early without getting overwhelmed. And for high alerts, you can set them around 160 to 180 milli-GDL, depending on your target range.
Like creating a buffer zone. And of
Right.
course, it's always a good idea to double check with a finger prick test if you're not sure about a reading or if your symptoms don't match what the CGM is saying.
Absolutely. These devices are a tool to help you make decisions, not to replace your own judgment or the advice of your doctor.
So the key takeaway here is CGMs are great for personalized diabetes management. It's not one size fits all.
Exactly. And the more you learn about using them, the more you'll get out of them. Don't be afraid to try things out. Track your data. See what works for you.
It's like any new skill. The more you practice, the better you get at it.
And don't be afraid to ask your healthcare team for help. They can help you understand your data, adjust your treatment plan, and figure out any problems you're having.
It's a team effort. Well, I think we've covered a lot today, from how CGMs work to practical tips for using them.
It's amazing to me how this technology is helping people take control of their health in a way that wasn't possible before.
It's like having a secret weapon against diabetes. But as we've been talking about, it's not just about the technology. It's about how you use it.
It's about understanding the information, making good decisions, and working with your doctor to find what's best for you.
So to our listeners, we'll leave you with this thought. CGMs are incredible tools, but the real power is in your hands. Take the knowledge, experiment, and keep learning.
And remember, the journey of discovery never ends.
Until next time, keep diving deep.